Hi, everyone. Firstly, some familiar faces, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Anandan Ambikaraja. I'm a lecturer in the Faculty of Health in the discipline of psychology. I've been at the University of Canberra since 2021, and my role is teaching research. So in the teaching side of things, I teach large first-year unit, 300 students for Foundations of Psychology, and also advanced statistical unit in third-year psychology. The research side of the work that I do, I'm a dementia researcher, so I look at risk factors that contribute to brain health and develop prediction models to identify the rates of decline, cognitive decline that we see, not only in those with dementia, but in normal cognitively aging. So I'm also a core member of the Centre for Aging Research and Translation. But I'm here to talk to you about none of that. So today, I'm here to talk to you about science communication, which is strange for me. It's something I've done in some parts throughout my whole life, but has sort of formulated in some way where it's become part of my output and impact, and so why I'm here today to give you my perspectives on it. You may notice, by the way, I have a bit of an accent. My parents are Sri Lankan, but I was born and raised in Ireland, so that's where that comes from. But just so you're not thinking there the whole time, where is this man from? So if you have any questions, let me know. If there's things you don't understand, let me know. So I thought I'd start. I thought I'd start this out by a deep dive into like where I sort of started with my science communication journey. It starts with this beautiful boy here. Many years ago. Probably it was actually quite a formative experience for me. I mean, the first part of this talk relates to the development of my communication skills, which happened at a young age. I think, in year 2 here, and I was doing a public speaking competition, which they have every year. And this competition was in some ways unique because it was the first time, my parents had sort of helped me prepare for a public speaking competition. So we had a speech written out. I memorized it. And it was formative for several reasons. One is that I learned the mechanics of public speaking through this early formative experience. I learned how to project my voice to be able to speak with or without a microphone. I learned how to use hand gestures. I mean, I'll be honest with you, my memories of this is that I nailed this talk. But I went back and to take this sort of screenshot, I rewatched the talk. And it's hilarious because you could see how trained and versed I am. My mom clearly told me to use hand gestures. So there's at one point where I say like friends and family. So I'm like, in my friends and my family. But the principles were there, and there were elements of things that, we all have to start somewhere in our journey. And so the principles of public speaking were sort of instilled in this age and in this arena. And it gave me, firstly, the confidence, the exposure to be able to speak in front of large crowds, in addition to the mechanics of the skills of public speaking. And then as I grew older and older, I developed a passion for writing. Writing is something I've always enjoyed in different ways and elements of my life. I was very lucky to have a few really excellent English teachers when I was in primary school and high school. And those led to a love for writing, and it was a way of creative arts and expression. And when I went to university, I was looking for jobs and roles and things that I could do. So one thing I did, there was a job on campus to be a radio show host. They had a radio that they needed someone to host. And so I had a go at that. And that was a really great opportunity, again, to sort of practice this art of public speaking, because it's really a craft. And it's something that no one is good at immediately. It takes time and effort and practice. And I think the ways in which I speak are largely reflective of the exposure that I've had of the opportunities to speak. And so if public speaking is something you want to get better at, I think exposing yourself to opportunities to be able to do it more and more is key. And now this is like what I do for a living, right? I'm a lecturer and I talk for hours. So, but I won't talk for hours today, so don't worry. And actually, so a bit left of field, when I was in university, I had a crack at stand-up comedy. So there was, again, it was just another avenue for me to be a public speaker, but it was also a way I saw of honing the craft of telling a story. Like, how do you ensure that you can bring an audience along with the story, craft it nicely, and be able to deliver something that resonates with them? And that's fundamentally what comedy was, in addition to helping people laugh. And so I entered a competition. I ended up winning that competition, and then that led to the person who owned the comedy area. This is all in Sydney, who put me into different events, and then I was able to earn money. So I'd go to these events, a big fan of comedy, and they would give me money at the end of the day. And so it seemed like didn't seem like a job at all. It was just a lot of fun. So I'd say those are probably some of many of the experiences that help form my communication skills. And I think what I want to articulate in this part of the talk is just that it all came from exposure. My ability to write came through the exposure of writing over and over again, the public speaking through opportunities to do so. And so the next part of the talk is really focused around science communication. You'll see why the science is in inverted quotes in a second. But I had opportunities to teach as well. So one of the first jobs I had was as a science teacher at this tutoring college called Matrix Education. And it was a beautiful job for me because it gave me first the opportunity to hone my craft in teaching, but also it was a classroom with like 15 students. I had a whiteboard just like this, textbook, and it really felt like a classroom environment. And I got a chance to connect with students and build my passion for teaching, which became a core tenet of what I do. I was also a science student ambassador when I was doing my undergraduate degree for UNSW, University of New South Wales. And what that allowed me to is, again, have public speaking opportunities. And I remember, I had one, and there were random opportunities. It was just whenever they needed someone to sort of promote the university in different spaces. And so one was, there was an optometry clinic at UNSW, and they had kids come in from primary school to go get their eyes tested. So they get half the class, those students get their eyes tested, and the other half, they're like, well, what do we do with them? And they're like, well, maybe we'll get a science student ambassador to do some education with them of some sort. I said, what do you want me to do? Like, I don't know, you're studying neuroscience, maybe you work, something to do with the eye and brain would be great. And so through that, I thought I'd do an activity where I got the kids, they were all sitting down, and I said, look, what I want you to do, I want you to close your eyes. Imagine you're on a beach. You look out, what do you see? Do you see a boat? Imagine you see a boat that's, got a blue sail. You see dolphins, and it goes on and on, right? So it allows them to sort of sit, sort of have a meditative practice and also focus. And so we went through this whole analogy. You come back onto the sand, you feel the sand, all these sort of things. And then I said, okay, open your eyes. I said, how many people saw the boat? And kids were like, yeah, I saw the boat. I said, what else did you see? I said, someone said, oh, I saw a dolphin who was jumping out of the water. It's like, oh, that's great. And they go back and forth, and they all say what they saw through that little activity. And then I say to them, well, how were you able to see all those things if your eyes were closed? Like their minds would blow. These primary school kids are like, I don't know what's going on. And I was able to demonstrate the link between the eye and the brain, right? And how they're connected, and how you're able to see even if your eyes aren't open. And so and that is just one example of the ways in which my ability to teach and communicate got started to tie together. So my knowledge of neuroscience, I was starting to build that into my presentation skills, which came into teaching. Now, I did a whole bunch of volunteer research internships in my undergraduate degree just to get exposure, because neuroscience is such a broad field. You could go molecular, neuroimaging, population health. And so I wanted exposure to these different areas. And so I worked at Neuroscience Research Australia as a volunteer researcher, working on different projects. And it was really great because I learned research skills that weren't formally being taught in my degree. I was able to get some paper publications as well, which was really valuable for me further on. And the key thing that happened that was formative was I was in the tea room and I was talking to a lady about what I was researching and what I was doing. And she said, wow, you explain your research so well. There's a job going out for a science communicator here. I'm actually looking to recruit someone. Would you be interested? Yeah, sure. Why not? I was meant to do honors, and I decided not to do honors, and I took up that job as a science communicator. And it was interesting to see the other side of it, see the more journalism side of how science operates and the priorities that there are in the media in terms of the communication of science and how rapid it is, and to work with scientists who are trying to communicate their message and grappling with the challenges that are there. But very quickly, I had to give up my teaching job at Matrix Education. And that was really, really hard for me because I loved the students, I loved the teaching, and I saw that that was a passion. So I only worked there for a short stint of time and then left that role and did a master's in teaching. Then realized I wanted to teach in part at a university. And so that's what led to my PhD. And so why is it in inverted commas, the science communication? Well, it's because I knew some science. I had foundational knowledge of science, but I would say in my depth of critical analysis and thinking isn't what it is today. And so when I was communicating, there were some nuances or key messages that I think could have been improved, which I only really developed those skills in my PhD. And so I did my PhD at ANU, in that journey of doing the PhD, I worked closely with the media team. Every university has a media team. Even University of Cambridge, there's a media team here. And essentially, if you reach out to them and say, hey, I have a paper, it's going to be published soon, I'd love to communicate that to the public. They will work on a media release, work with you to advertise that paper to the public. So it was just because communication was such a core tenet of mine. I think fundamentally science communication falls under the umbrella of teaching for me. And so that's what led to my passion in saying, well, the research process for me doesn't stop with the publication. I will always ensure that I engage with the public. And that's something I carry on to this day. So every time there's a publication or something I'm doing, I engage with UC Media or the university's media and talk about it. And through my PhD, I was also having a go at, like I said, I had a love of writing, and so I had a go at writing blog posts. And it was really useful experience to just have this consistent thing that I was doing. Also, when you're doing a PhD, there's always great opportunities to procrastinate. So a blog post was a good way to do that. And so it was just something I would write and my thoughts or an idea. And I had there are a really good example of blog posts out there. My personal favorite is the Crossley Lab blog post, which is done by Merlin Crossley, who is a professor at UNSW, but he's also like the deputy vice chancellor of academic at UNSW. And he does a lot of things, but every Friday he will consistently get out a blog post. And I've talked to him about it. I said, how do you do it? And he says, well, I'm thinking of these ideas all the time when I'm mowing the lawn, when I'm walking the dog. And so I just write them up. And so what was valuable for me is learning the lesson of done is better than perfect. And it's about the consistency of putting out content rather than ensuring each piece of content is perfect, which I think is something that's key in academia. When you put so much effort into publications, it's a different mentality coming into science communication. And then I realized very quickly that podcasting or radio was really my preferred format of communication. I liked writing. I worked with a lot of media, and I've done news outlets and news programs. But what I found was that long-form podcasts allowed me to explain content in the depth that I wanted to ensure that the educational messages were landing. And so that's what led to Midnight Conversations, which is a podcast which I just do with a friend of mine. It's really low resource. We both just have two good quality mics that we hook up to our computer, and consistently we just, over our lunch break, we'll record a podcast. It's sort of like a journal club. We'll pick a paper, analyze it, and then discuss the findings, but make it accessible and engaging to the public. And that's the premise of that podcast. And yeah, academia, you have a whole host of opportunities to engage in science communication. And so I build upon that with my personal website that I have up online. The website's anandanambikaraja.com, so if you can spell my name, you can access all the website resources, so it's not too hard. There's publications, my teaching, the podcast is there as well. And the teaching resources, I should have mentioned, I'm also leading the Gen AI community of practice in the Faculty of Health. I've handed that over for the last 6 months to a colleague because I'm on research sabbatical, OSP, at the university, but I'll be coming back in a month or so. But I started up that community of practice at the end of 2023 and developed a workshop last year in terms of Gen AI, upskilling staff. And so all of that content is available in teaching as well. And so, again, I view that as communication, right? It's teaching, it's science communication, it's getting a message out to the public. But this website's been really valuable to have an online presence. I'm sure you've been told this already, and you may have done it, but to Google yourself and to see what comes up, and you can articulate or craft that profile based on the image you'd like to portray. And so for me, this website, all of these are keywords that are indexed by Google. And so when people search up like Carrot or Canberra, neuroscience, dementia, my name comes up. And so it allows you to have this reach. But that's not really, for me, it wasn't really about reach. I mean, it's just something added benefit to advertise. But for me, it was really about collecting all of my work in one coherent space. So I have all my publications, my CV, I keep up to date, media outreach, which documents every single output that I've had in terms of connections with media and publications. So it's been useful in that ways, but it's had other benefits as well. And so those are things to let you know. So what's the key take home messages? So I think firstly is know your why. Like, why do you want to engage in science communication? Is it something you're passionate about, or is it something that you want to do to have people who fund your research? Is it something you want to just connect with other researchers? I think once you really know what your why is, the following questions will come together and have clarity. So you're not just saying yes to everything, you're actually saying yes to opportunities that align with why you're doing what you're doing. So knowing your audience is key. Who you want to speak to. For me, largely it was my audience is students and the public. It's all about public education and critical thinking in science. Know your format, the ways in which you like to communicate. Is it written word? Is it through public speaking? And in what ways? And so for me, again, as you probably told, it's through teaching and radio. And then also the content. What type of content do you want to produce? What do you want to talk about? What's your message, right? And so all that comes down to in what ways you want your content to be there. I think I probably should have, this is a really key message, which is work on your craft. I mean, at the end of the day, whatever you're doing in science communication, the value I had is, I started science communication when no one was watching, right? So when you work in that sort of space, you have the freedom to practice and make mistakes. But even with the podcast, I mean, if you look back at some of those early episodes, they're not as good as they are today, right? But we had an open discussion. We said, well, it's not about getting it perfect and then releasing it. It's about documenting the journey of improvement. And funnily enough, people don't seem to worry too much about the quality as we do. They just enjoy the casual conversation about science. So the working on your craft, how do you do it? Well, of course, there's conference presentations, but they come every now and then, and they're very select for the audience, but it depends again on your why. But there's opportunities, 3-minute thesis, pint of science. But also you can make opportunities. Like there's nothing stopping you from starting a journal club in your area and talking with people who are interested in science and having discussions. So every time someone presents a paper, right? And that in itself is an opportunity for you to practice science communication in a small way. So regular practice, I really can't emphasize that more enough. And then the last one is opportunity and responsibility. So I think there's a real big opportunity in science communication because there's so much misinformation out there currently. And so people are really looking for those with expertise and value and engagement to resonate their message with them. What benefit I think you all have, from what I understand of you, is that you have some scientific background or academic background. And so that you leverage that expertise. And if you can build your presentation communication skills, that just becomes a really powerful tool in your toolkit to be able to communicate and connect with people. So there's a real big opportunity there, and in conjunction with that, it comes with a responsibility. So you won't know the number of times someone tells me like, oh, I don't have much faith in science. One day they tell you that red wine's good for you. One day they tell you red wine's bad for you. And it's like, well, there's reasons for that, and there's ways in which you can explain why that is. That's why we have meta-analyses. That's why we need to talk about the size of an effect. That's why we have these different ways to think about it. It comes into, so in my area in Alzheimer's disease, just recently, I think yesterday or the day before, there was a release about a new drug that's been put on the market for addressing Alzheimer's disease, and it's a monoclonal antibody, and it helps. What they said in the article is it actually reduces cognitive decline by 35%. Right, and so you have someone in the public who sees that their parent or loved one has Alzheimer's disease and they're in the early stages. They're like, maybe that's something I need to do. 35% is massive. What they don't tell you in the article is when you look into the paper, it's not an absolute effect. It's a relative effect. It's a relative effect to the other group, right? And so that means that it's not an absolute 35% reduction. You'll notice it's actually quite much smaller than that. And so you have people who may not have their expectations tempered appropriately because of communication. That's not miscommunication. Journalists can only do as much as they can. They have to work with you all as scientists to help get the facts as right as possible. And in some ways, the media, you can do the best job you can, and sometimes it gets taken in unintended ways. But there is a responsibility. Just at the end of the day, are you doing the best job that you can to explain the message as clearly as possible? And for me, that comes from educating the public and developing critical thinking in students and public. That's it for me. So I hope you found that enjoyable. If you have any questions, I don't know if there's time, but yeah, either or. Go for it. Yeah.
You were talking about was storytelling. I like your advice on storytelling. Those of us who aren't naturally funny, and probably don't do stand-up comedy,
Yeah.
what advice would you give to sort of practice our storytelling?
Yeah. Firstly, I'm not funny, so let me let me start there. Like it's so you know I make bad jokes all the time. I think I'm comfortable when a joke doesn't land to just let it go. And so when it comes to the beauty of stand-up comedy is resilience, but you don't need to be a stand-up comedy to develop resilience. But academia, there was the greatest science communication talk I listened to once by an academic I know, and he said, science is full of rejections. Sometimes you get journal rejections, you get grant rejections, even your data may reject you. Like it's filled with rejections left, right, and center. So you have to be, it demands resilience, and if you don't have resilience, you build up resilience. And so when it comes to storytelling, it's through practice. So now storytelling doesn't have to be to students, doesn't have to be in presentations. It can be talking to your friends and saying, hey, I heard this paper, this was of interest to me, and let me tell you about that. That's storytelling. Like conversations are storytelling, and we all have conversations every day. So it's opportunities to practice that art. So I think that would be one of the ways to talk about it. But yeah, it's really powerful. I mean, like when I'm in classrooms, I could tell students in teaching about Fisher's exact test, or I can tell them the story about how a lady came in and Fisher made her a tea, and she said, "Oh, this is disgusting." And he was like, "Why is it disgusting?" She's like, "Well, you've added the milk last, and I can always taste the difference when milk is put in first or last." And he said, "No, you can't. That's not possible. There's no way." So he lined up 20 cups of tea, and he told her 10 had milk in it first, 10 had milk in it last, and they're randomly ordered. I want you to differentiate between them. And then that's how he developed Fisher's exact test. Like that resonates so much more. If you talk about students' tea test, you could say, oh, it's a comparison of difference between means. Or you can say, there was a guy who worked at a Guinness brewing factory. Immediately, you've got student interest when you're talking about it. And he was interested to know the difference in the quality between two batches of beer. And so what he did was he developed this method of comparing the qualities between two different batches. But he was working at Guinness, and they didn't want him to publish the research, but he knew that it had value and merit. And so he published it under the pseudonym Student. That's why it's Student's Tea Test. If you tell a student that, they'll always connect. Oh, a t-test is the difference between means. Like, that's it. Is that all it is? Like, why is it all this language behind it? And so, I mean, it comes naturally to me now because I've done it my whole life. And that's why I'm sort of showing you like the years that go into it in different formats and ways. I wasn't doing it initially thinking it would benefit me now, but it's just, that's why like working on your craft and whenever you start is important. Yeah.
I was just going to your podcast, and I saw that there's one podcast that we can access. Thank you, sir.
On the website. Yeah, so the website shows you the most recent podcast, but if you have Apple or Spotify, it's all there. So if you just go on all the episodes are there. Yeah, no worries. Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. I think as researchers, we're trained to make sure that everything we say is evidence-based, that we've conducted data, it's peer-reviewed. So when it comes to informal content, and that's the most, I guess, the emerging information that people are going on Instagram and scrolling through and getting the information through those easy access media. What are your thoughts on like, say, what you for your podcast, translating something that we're trained to think so much about credibility and evidence-based and peer review into something so informal and easy access?
It is a really great question. I think it's hit the nail on the head of a big challenge. I think one advantage I have in my background, which could have been a disadvantage if I didn't catch it early enough, is the fact that, I was a presenter first, then science communicator, then became a scientist, right? So that wasn't as much of a concern than if I was like formally trained as a scientist and then started public speaking. It's like this, you're trying to retrain your brain in some ways to think differently. So what ways do you go about it? I think, firstly, it comes back to this of knowing your audience. Are your audience peers and other scientists, or are they the public? And I think, I've done stuff where I'm talking about my research paper for a radio interview, but I know that the core findings of the research paper are just too ahead of what the message will land. So then I use that tangentially to have a key take-home message that I think would help people, because that's my why, is just try to help people with. So I think if you answer for yourself, what's your why, that can help feed into the audience, the format, and the content. In terms of, well, you're trained so well to speak in one way and speak so carefully and considered. I think the reality of it is science communication isn't like that. And the biggest challenge is that often your words, as carefully crafted as they may be, even as a science communicator, can be misinterpreted by others. That's what's really hard when I do work with, say, ABC or 9 News or whatnot, and I talk to them for 10 minutes, they take 30 seconds. And those 30 seconds, how perfect can one person talk, when you're having an interview? And those 30 seconds taken out of context may not mean stuff. And it gives you a lot of, I think it gives me a lot of, when you have that perspective of the other side of media, you realize how much of the junk you see in the tabloids, in terms of, or even like when they're trying to get it right, it can still be incorrect, just like that Alzheimer's disease thing. And so that's why, for me, the way to sort of combat that is through long form discussion. But I still engage in those formats because I can see the impact is larger, right? You have larger reach and larger impact. So there's an element of having to be learn to be comfortable with your messages being misinterpreted, and also for maybe your peers don't think it's as professional to do science communication, and maybe you agree with them. But for me, I didn't care, because it was important for my why of what I do. So yeah, long-winded answer. Hopefully there's some value in there.
Well, I'll ask a question. So we're part of a network, and all these beautiful people are doing their own separate research. You and your community, your research community, how have you then, as a group, worked together to communicate the message of either the HEAL kind of vision or your own research unit? Have you
so we're
going forward, in different medias of that, and how to?
So I'm, like I said, I'm part of CARET, the Center for Aging Research and Translation, and so we developed we worked with UC Media, and we listened to their advice. We put together a media strategy, and that's something that we're implementing to try to increase outreach. And we've seen the benefits of that in terms of community engagement, right? All this information and knowledge that we have in academia sometimes is like there's a roadblock to accessing it. Even roadblock to accessing it for us. I mean, how many times have you tried to access a publication? You can't access it, right? And you've got to go through all these channels. And now if you think of someone without an institutional access or login, then it's even harder. So the UC media team, or any media team, is really good at trying to connect you. They have the people that they know what lands and what doesn't land. I see a lot of I think, coming back to your question, the people who haven't done science communication much in CARET, they really struggle with saying, no, this is exactly what I want to say and this is how I want to say it. And the media team says, well, no one's really going to understand or connect with that. And so that just comes through practice. I think, though, if you ever watch the 3-minute theses or even partake in it, you can see how that's such a beautiful skill, because they're marrying the scientific precision with engagement, and it's done in a really careful, calculated way. But that's not always the case in science communication. So I would say, firstly, doing something, picking something to do. But if it's for a HEAL or a center, you want something to be coordinated so that you're not duplicating efforts. If all of you went to UC Media, probably overwhelm them. So if there's someone in the middle who could say, hey, here are these publications. And, it's simple. Like for me, with my website, that's where I put my publications up. And that's just ways in which people can access things. So just ensuring your stuff is available for people to access that you want them to access. Google your name, see what comes up. Google HEAL, see what comes up. Is the landing page, do they have a place to contact someone? Like all these, making the barriers to access easy for people, I think. I mean, if you don't know much about AI, I'll plug my course again. It gives you the foundations of not only the use cases of AI, but how it's built, operated, and how it works, so that even as AI changes, you have a foundations of how it works. Fundamentally, its purpose, one of its principles is summarizing complex information really simply, which is science communication. So, you know, there's ethics and whatnot, and that's all in the course. But yeah, I think it's what it's built for is this, bridging this gap. And so if you say, there's prompt engineering in there as well. And so you can design prompts saying, look, imagine you're an expert science communicator who is trying to explain this complex research concept to an audience that is, you know, this, and then both all there, and you can work back and forth with that. So.
Thank you so much.
No worries. Hope that was a value.
Want to contact me, anandin.ambikaraja@canberra.edu.au. So